Now, will you believe if I were to tell you that we will end up dating our parents in our adult relationships, and there is a very simple psychological reason for this. The health of your romantic relationships is a direct reflection of the relationship that you have with your family. If you are currently struggling in your romantic life with a partner or in a marriage, for those of you who are married, if you are struggling with your spouse, I would like you to take a step back and look at how is your relationship with your immediate family members, especially your parents. Now, as you take a closer look, I would like you to look at how you feel, to pay attention as to how you feel when you connect with your parents. Are you able to completely be yourself, own your identity, and express yourself? Or do you try to suppress your emotions down just to keep the peace, to avoid any petty arguments, or to avoid any arguments or conflicts at all costs, because you know if you were to express yourself, if you were to express your truth, you would be met with criticisms or judgments, and this can apply to any aspects of your life. In a healthy family environment, a parent will make space to try and understand the child's emotions, needs, and concerns without making them feel like they are too much or they are being a burden. And then they would offer them the reassurance that the child needs and help them to address those issues, those emotional, and help them to navigate around those emotional challenges that they face, and this in return would help that child to develop an emotional safety, and this emotional safety would help that child and the parent to connect and foster a healthy, loving environment. A child is hardwired to bond and connect with their parents because they depend on their parents completely for their survival. This is also a time when a child learns to relate and connect to emotions. They learn healthy emotional skills, boundaries, and communication skills. So if this child grows up in the presence of parents who are unable to create emotional safety to allow them to express themselves freely without the fear of being criticized or yelled, that child will not understand what is emotional safety. And when a child did not experience emotional safety at home, this child will end up becoming an adult that will repeat the exact same dynamic that this child once learned and grew up in. And this will eventually manifest into their existing reality when they start their own family. This is in essence how generational trauma gets passed on to their offspring as they move on to starting their own family, until someone eventually recognizes this extremely unhealthy dynamic that is emotionally damaging and choose to make that commitment by going down the healing path to unlearn and relearn new healthy emotional skills. Here's a painful reality of children who had not experienced emotional safety at home will now try to look outside to find that comfort and emotional safety that they never received at home. And what is really tragic in this instance is that these children that have been emotionally starved, neglected, and traumatized to some extent will not only run into people who will not only not be able to provide them that emotional safety that they are looking for, but they will likely attract people who will mirror back the same patterns that they once grew up with their parents. And this eventually leads them into this vicious cycle of this push and pull toxic relationship, and in their mind they will try to justify this is how relationships are because they are now reliving the similar experience they once had as a child, which is now unfolding in their romantic connection, and this eventually becomes a relationship imprint in their mind of what relationships will and would look like. Now, this is how a lot of people end up staying stuck in toxic relationships, because as much as the intellectual mind may recognize that the connection is not very healthy, unfortunately on a subconscious level their nervous system is somewhat trained to acknowledge and and be part of what feels familiar. Naturally, as a human being, during our developmental years, what we learn from our parents is pretty much what will go on to shape our reality. So if our upbringing, our patterns that we grew up in were unhealthy and toxic, as a child, you will not know how to differentiate that. So as you move into your adult relationships, this will start replaying as toxic connections until you finally decide that something is just not working. And it usually takes a few relationship or a certain level of experience that would cause an extensive emotional damage before you would come to conclusion that something just isn't right. And unfortunately, a lot of time, these children that was made to feel like they were too much, or maybe they were not good enough for their parents, they feel they were unworthy, would start developing this unworthiness that maybe I'm not made for relationships, or maybe I'm just not built to be in relationships, which is not true. Now, for those children who grew up in such environment, if you had parents who were just neglectful, who abandoned you in some shape or form, or if you just had emotionally unavailable parents that were not able to give that emotional safety, I want you to know that it was never your fault. You are loved, you deserve to be loved and protected and to feel safe. If you had not had that, it is very likely and it's justified that you may have gotten yourself into toxic relationships, and it's really not easy to break away from such toxic connections. It's easier said than done, but for those people who have not been in such dynamic, if they didn't grow up in that dynamic, understand this is part of what's familiar to your nervous system. So it's not that easy to break away from toxic connections, but when you have the awareness, you will be able to put the pieces together and work through the healing so that you can finally, as an adult, learn healthy emotional skills and understand what healthy relationships should look like. And as long as you have the awareness, you'll be able to start, because we cannot heal from what we don't understand. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Vina Raji, and this channel is dedicated to talking about healing from childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, and attachment style, which I have worked on myself over the last couple of years without any professional help. And I have dedicated to starting this channel to share with everyone on my healing journey, hoping that this will be able to benefit those who are committed to their healing, for those who are currently seeking support. Now, if you're new here, I would love it if you can help to please hit like, share, subscribe, comment. This will help me to grow my channel, and this would give me that reassurance that I should be making more of such content, and I would also know that more people are looking for such content, and this would also help me to build and grow my community. There is a psychological reason as to why we attract the partners that we have into our lives. A child that grows up feeling unloved, unseen, unheard, judged, or not receiving of approval, acknowledgement, or validation from people closest to them in their life are emotionally starved. Now, this child is devoid of healthy relationship skills and understanding of emotions, and as a result, this child will stay stuck waiting and craving for the love and affection that they may not receive, because it only gets much worse as the child grows older. The adults or the parents who are not self-aware of this behavior is unlikely to notice the emotional harm that is being inflicted onto that child. And that innocent child now will start to internalize the lack of love and affection as someone who isn't worthy of receiving love, because they start believing that they are not good enough. And this is the beginning of a destructive cycle of self-doubt, low self-esteem, lack of self-confidence that over time spills over, and they will develop a sense of unworthiness that will go on to affect every area of their life. Our romantic relationships are the next intimate connection that we will explore and experience after our relationship with our parents or caregivers. Now, which is why all these wounds are often visible and intense in the context of a romantic relationship as compared to other relationships that we may have come into contact into our lives. Now, a romantic partner that may seem neglectful is going to remind this child that was once neglected by that parent when they were so much younger again of the experience that they had. And this in return triggers that 12-year-old child in this adult body to remember that emotional pain that they had endured before, and they relive that pain once again in the context of this connection. And that is why inner child wounding can be extremely damaging in our ability to foster and build a healthy connection, because that child is now going to want to try to fix what they couldn't do at that time in this present moment in their relationship with a romantic partner. This neglected and emotionally starved child may grow up becoming an adult that may even appear somewhat confident, and they can often have very successful careers as seen in a lot of cases. However, this difficult emotions remains stuck and buried deep down in their body as well as their subconscious. However, as they start exploring the dating space, as they start entering into a romantic connection, now this is where they will often attract a partner that would start to mirror or reveal all these hidden pains and emotions that has been buried deep down. Now, as they would start experiencing this trigger, this will create intense emotional pain, and a lot of adults will not be able to understand where this strong surge of emotions are actually coming from. Now, what is happening here is this child that was 12 years old, that was unheard, unloved, unseen, dismissed, neglected, or abandoned in some shape or form, is now being reactivated again in this adult connection, in this romantic connection. It's now being, that child is now resurfacing again in this adult body, in this new relationship that they are exploring. Now, you may ask, why do we attract those who remind us of our parents? So let's go back to that 12-year-old child. Now, this is just an example that I've quoted throughout this video. It can be any age. It doesn't have to be 12. It can be 12, 15, 13, 15, 16, whatever age that you deem appropriate. You get the gist of it. So on a subconscious level, that child that was emotionally starved at the age of 12 hasn't really moved past that experience on an emotional level, though physically and intellectually they have tried to justify it, to get over it, to justify those events that has caused them hurt. So let's say, for example, if the child now had a parent that was just always busy, they wouldn't call, they wouldn't pick up the calls when the child would try to reach them, they would somehow just get ignored in the pretext of the parent being busy. So this child now will experience emotional hurt and likely will not have a healthy emotional outlet to share that. Now, let's say the parent is too busy to attend to important events like school events, or maybe the parent forgotten about their birthdays, the parent did not get a gift for the child. This sends a message to the child that they are not important. The child again experiences neglect and extreme emotional hurt, and this accumulation of emotional hurt is often not expressed because children or child that is often neglected or has neglectful parents are often not taught to express emotions or discuss feelings. So it is very unlikely that the child would have any healthy skills to talk about it and to express themselves, and they would have all the emotional hurt buried deep down. So now this adult child has moved on, they have grown up, and they have developed their own identity for themselves. And as they begin to explore the dating scene, now let's say if they were to come into contact with a partner that displays healthy relationship skills like being consistently available, communicating consistently, trying to resolve conflicts in a healthy way, trying to address about an issue that is upsetting. Now, this child, this adult child, is going to be really confused because they aren't equipped with healthy emotional skills on how to resolve conflict, on how to deal with emotions in a healthy way in a relationship context. So they would do what they had learned as a child from their parents, which is to either walk away or to sweep things under the rug. They would try to keep the peace, so they avoid conflicts at all costs. Or on another extreme, they would have developed people-pleasing tendencies where they would do anything to try and keep the peace, to avoid any rejection or abandonment by downplaying their own emotions. And this is very unfortunate. This is why a lot of people don't actually deal with conflicts in a healthy way, not because they don't want to, because they actually don't even know how to deal with it. They have not experienced it from anyone. However, this is now interesting. Should they come into contact with another partner who had now grown up in a similar environment with emotionally unavailable parents, now they are likely to display all the unhealthy patterns that the adult child is familiar with from their own childhood. So this familiarity here now creates this intense chemistry and a strong connection, and the push and pull feels like true love, like a deep connection that they had not experienced before. So what is happening here now is these two individuals, these two separate individuals with their own unique experience and hurt that they have experienced in their life is now connecting. And what they have in common is in fact this core wound that they had once experienced from their emotionally unavailable parents, like neglect, abandonment, and more. However, what will happen in this context is this 12-year-old child that was helpless at that time as a child is now going to try to rekindle, to repair that bond and that connection. So this is now going to be an attempt of that 12-year-old child trying to get that love and affection that the child had not received from their parents. However, this will subconsciously play out in the context of their romantic relationship with their partner. Now, this is what makes this dynamic really interesting, because despite the fact that these two individuals share similar core wounding, they would have developed different coping mechanisms, which is why they are drawn towards each other, because as we all know that opposite attracts. So the partner might have a complete opposite reaction as to how they would handle relationship or difficult emotions as compared to this child here. So while this child might try to win the affection and love from the partner, now the partner would probably push away, because maybe as a child that was the coping mechanism that they had developed, where they had to walk away from the parents because expressing emotions felt too difficult. It didn't feel safe. It didn't feel important to that child. They never felt important for that matter. So this will eventually create a very painful push and pull dysfunctional dynamic, and at the end of this relationship, both parties will experience extreme emotional hurt, because they, as much as they share the similar core wounding, they will not know how to relate to each other, to connect and resolve the conflict in a healthy way. And they would also not know how to ask for their needs to be met in a healthy way. So I'm just going to give you a short example. It's a personal story of how this looked like in my personal life. So I grew up with emotionally unavailable parents, and both my parents would never apologize. So that is to say, I'm 35 now. To this date, I have never once received a genuine apology from my parents, even when there were certain things that was never my fault. I never did anything, and sometimes it's not necessarily about me doing something wrong. It's just them being against my choices and my decisions, because they're just overly critical of everything that I do. I mean, somehow anything and everything that I do never seem enough for them. So long story short, I have never once received an apology. So what essentially happens is when we get into a disagreement, we will not really work towards resolving the issue. So the disagreement just goes on, and then both parties will just sort of like walk away, completely disengage without coming to a resolution, and then we are just expected to deal with it. So I would be given the silent treatment. We would not communicate, we would not talk about it until days later, and then we would come into contact again, and everyone would pretend like it never happened. We would just not even talk about it. And in fact, a lot of times I would have to be the one to initiate the conversation. Like, I have to go back and start the conversation. I have to be the bigger person because my parents are older to me. And as a child, it is only respectful if I were to go back and initiate and say something, and then everyone will just go back like nothing has ever happened. Now, in the instance where something happens again, maybe at some point again, or a few months later, there is another disagreement, and if at all I would bring up the subject again about something that happened previously that was not really addressed or resolved, then again it gets swept under the rug, and they would say things like, it's done and over, why are you talking about it again, you're making such a big deal, you're being too petty. So I often felt very invalidated, and I never received an apology, and most importantly, I was often molded into being that person who has to make that first move, who has to initiate. I was always told that I have to just let it go and not hold grudges. Now, it wasn't until a few years ago I started acknowledging that emotional harm and damage it had done to me, and how it also played out in my personal relationships, with my friendships, with my romantic connections especially. I have been in a connection where I had never received an apology, even when something happened, something that was never my fault. Even if I were to point that out, I would not actually get a genuine apology. So because of my conditioning, where I had this dynamic with my parents, I would talk myself into letting it go. So I would be the one to go back and initiate that conversation and sort of like just pretend like everything was fine and not really bring up that issue for fear of, rejection or abandonment, because that was my whole experience with my parents. So as you can see, there are more examples like this. And when you do not know why you feel upset, why you feel very strongly about certain things that plays out in your adult relationship, that is likely because as a child you have gone through similar experiences and your emotions were never validated, your experiences were never validated, you never felt seen, you never felt heard, you often felt like you never mattered, like you were unimportant. And this will have a significant psychological damage in your adult relationships if you do not know why this is happening to you and what you can do and how you can actually deal with it. Now, the first rule to dealing with this is to understanding your own emotions, and next is to learn how to manage this in a healthy way, and that will be a separate video on this topic. How can you fix this? In order for you to understand why you are struggling in your romantic life with your partner or your spouse, you are struggling to connect with them, you will first have to take a look how you felt growing up in the presence of your family. Did you feel safe, protected, and supported? Or did you feel like you always have to keep the peace, you have to attend to your parents' needs, and you were not allowed to express yourself in a safe way? This will shine some light into the areas of where you can start working on. Now, with this awareness, you can start to dive deeper into your childhood experience, your childhood wounds, and understand how these wounds are still showing up and affecting your current life and your current relationship. And this is where you will now need to find that courage to do the inner child work, to do the healing work. You have to work toward healing the inner child and rewire your past experiences to help you move past these painful emotions that is stagnant in your body and your subconscious mind. Now, for those of you who are currently struggling, I want you to know this, that healing is not an easy journey and is definitely not linear. It's a roller coaster of emotions, and you will face a lot of challenges in your healing journey. But I want you to know that as you choose to go down the healing path, you must be willing to confront and acknowledge the discomfort that comes with healing, because you will definitely get triggered a lot. And without the trigger, you will actually not be able to heal, because you will not understand where you need to work on. And you can look at it this way. You can choose to do the healing where you can commit to maybe 3 years of solid inner work, healing work. Or if you refuse to do that, then you could settle for what could possibly be another 30 years or lifetime of struggle and failed relationship, or just having an unfulfilled, unhappy relationship with your family. Now, the choice is yours, so you have to decide what is it that you really want in your life. Do you want a fulfilling, healthy relationship, or do you want to continue to live the rest of your life in pain? And only you can answer that to yourself.